I will say, when it comes to the Stranger Things finale, there was a huge twist here that I was not expecting. Welcome back, everyone. Were you wondering why that fade to black was there? Me too, in this finale. We're gonna talk about that. We're gonna talk about the things that I loved. But before we do, I want to know, what did you think of the Stranger Things finale? And what did you think of the fact that it was also released on New Year's Eve? Have you watched it yet? And how did you feel about it? Let me know down in the comments. I want to start off with the things that worked for me, because while I feel that there is a lot to talk about here in terms of what could have been done better, and I feel like the internet is just drowning in that right now, and we are going to talk about that, I would like to start off with the things that I enjoyed, because ultimately I did have a fun time with this series all the way through, including the finale. I think there is some good stuff in the finale. I have notes, but we'll get to those. I want to start off with something that I think this show does extremely well, and that is delivering on emotional beats. And when I say emotional beats, I don't mean beats that you eat. I mean moments in scenes that are emotional. And in this case, there were quite a few. One of the ones that stands out in my mind is we have a really good one between Eleven and Hopper in this finale, and I just felt so moved by it. Also, can we just talk about how David Harbour is a very good actor, and I am here for David Harbour giving speeches in movies and television. I just feel like he's good at what he does. He's a good actor. So that is something that I enjoy about this show, and I think it always delivers on making me feel for these characters, especially as time goes on. You really get to fall in love with them even more as we get to know them. And they are distinct. They are iconic in a lot of ways. And I think for me, why I fell in love with Stranger Things at the beginning and why I connect to so many of these characters is because of its ties to Dungeons and Dragons. And recently, I've also been covering and doing some reviews on The Mighty Nine, which is an animated series that was inspired by Campaign 2 of Critical Role. And it's just reminded me of why I've fallen in love with this show in the first place. And really what that comes from is my connection to these characters. These are kids that just have fun hanging out together and celebrating their weird love of things that makes them unique. It's fandoms, you know, it's our weird nerdy fandoms that we all connected over when we were kids, when we were younger. And it was that buy-in that really allowed me to stay with these characters up to the finale and has allowed me to feel connected to them. And I love that with this finale as well, we kind of bring it back around to Dungeons and Dragons. There's references, and I think just the way that it ends, we're going to talk about that a little bit more in a minute, but I loved that element of it. I think it is so easy to see yourself as these characters if you are someone who knows what it's like to be on the outside, to be nerdy and have to find your people through life. And seeing these kids in Stranger Things grow up and find their place in the world is what I've really loved about the journey. And I think the finale does that, and I think it does it pretty well. There's a lot of great payoff for those of us that have been here since season 1. There's even some great character exploration for newer characters such as Henry, Vecna, who shows up, and we get a little bit of backstory, a little bit of lore about Henry's origin and why he became Vecna and how he came to this place, and how, in a way, not only is Henry similar to Eleven, but also has this connection in a way to Will and was someone that was manipulated by the Mind Flayer and yet decided to buy in to everything the Mind Flayer was showing him instead of go the other way with it, to the point that now Vecna and the Mind Flayer are basically one being. They've come together. I thought that was a really cool story point as well. I think there's a lot of cool ideas in this finale and in this season and in this show. I think there's a lot of cool ideas, but I think especially in season 5 and in this finale, the execution of them is where I have some issues with the show. However, the idea to bring the Mind Flayer back, I think was great, and I think it is important because there were a lot of people that were worried that, Vecna had basically taken the spot as the top villain now. Mind Flayer's done, and yet we've been building the Mind Flayer since the beginning of this show, pretty much. So how do you make that make sense? And what happened to the Mind Flayer? Now, that being said, there have been a lot of little baddies that we've also seen. Obviously, we had the Demo Bats, we've had the Demo Dogs, the Demogorgon, all of these demo creatures, and we don't really get a ton of that coming back in this finale, unfortunately. And so there is a little bit of an emptiness, I think, in the final fight. I think the final fight just feels like it's missing some struggle. We do have our heist and things go sideways, and I think that was good. I liked that. I was expecting it because, at this point, all of our heists that we've been on, all of our missions go sideways in this show. But they did that in a way that I was like, now we're really in trouble. And then when we got down to the final fight, it kind of just felt like there wasn't a ton of trouble. Like, the plan worked well, and that's the end of it. That being said, once we've dealt with all the danger in the Upside Down, beyond the Upside Down, really, and once we've dealt with the Upside Down and removed all of those threats, I think the wrap-up for this show is really nice. It's pretty long. It's kind of like almost the last half of this finale, which is quite long. It's 2 hours and 8 minutes, I think, is the runtime on it, somewhere around there. And the last 40 minutes is basically wrap-up. However, I like these characters. I want to know what happens to them. I want to know how they're planning to spend the rest of their lives, or if they're going to be okay, or just what's up, because I'm invested. So for me, I enjoyed it. I really loved the closure we get with Joyce and Hopper. I love their happy ending. I thought it was really sweet. It really moved me. And I loved Dustin getting to be valedictorian. I loved his speech. I loved how he kind of flipped the script on it, yet he also gets to be this brainiac nerd, but not just someone who is very by the book. He questions the books that he reads. He pushes the envelope. He challenges the system, but he's also still a sweetheart at his core. I loved that about what we got with Dustin, and I loved the kind of final adventure with Mike DMing a final little story for our players, for our campaign to round everything out. The idea of also passing that on to his younger sister Holly and her friends, and watching the adventure kind of continue. Now, Mike and his friends are going to go off to school or go off to the rest of their lives, and the younger generation is taking over. Even I loved Mike's little story about Elle, how he explains kind of how he's willing to move on from what happened with Elle and let it go, and has this idea of what could have happened if she maybe survived. And I think there are going to be people that might take that a little bit more literally than it's intended. To me, my interpretation of that story was simply that this is Mike's idea of what could have happened based on some observations he had, so that he can accept what has happened and move on, as Hopper said he should, because he kind of has those two choices, right? He can either blame himself forever and never move forward in life, or he can do what Eleven would want him to do and find a way to let this go and move on with his life. And that's what he does. Whether or not Eleven is actually alive, I don't think she is, but I like the idea of a potential happy ending for her. She has been through so much, and it's like Hopper says to Eleven in the show, you've had a life that has been so messed up and you deserve so much more. And it was something that he wanted to do for her. But ultimately, Eleven is the hero. She is kind of this chosen one. And so I think the way that the story went makes sense and is kind of what I was expecting. I thought we were going to maybe lose some more people than we did, but overall, I think it went to a place that felt right, that felt natural. And that being said, I was still concerned for people throughout the journey, because I don't really know what's going to happen till we're there. I have ideas, and for the most part, my ideas were pretty spot on, but there were some surprises they threw in there. Mostly, the surprises were in relation to some of the things that I did not like about this finale, such as, for some reason, we forgot how to pace out moments that are all about suspense and horror, something that the show has been doing well for a lot of its time as a series, and yet all of a sudden, in this finale, and in earlier parts of season 5 as well, we seem to have forgotten how pacing works. The editing in the part where Steve is falling off the tower, fade to black. What are we doing? What is happening? Did no one tell them that this was going to be one episode? And even if you wanted to do a fade to black moment, you probably shouldn't do it so soon to the beginning of the episode. Honestly, the part where Jonathan runs to grab Steve, I feel like it would have been a suspenseful enough moment if you just let Steve fall and then let Jonathan run in and grab him. I'm still gonna be worried. You don't have to cut to black. You cut to black and I'm like, what's happening? What am I watching right now? And there are issues with this throughout the finale, in my opinion. There's just a lot of moments that feel really slow and lethargic, and like they're trying to stretch something out to build tension, and in doing that, they lose momentum of the scene. The whole season, I guess, feels at moments too bloated, and that is tied to amount of characters and scenes, which we've already talked about when I was talking about Volume 2 of Season 5, and it also relates to just the editing, the pacing, and the way that things were cut together here. I don't understand why they did it this way. There are some cool ideas, but some really weird, slow execution. And another moment that comes to my mind in terms of the way that the story plays out, I like this idea. I like the idea of Joyce being the one to put the kind of final nail in the coffin here for Vecna. But what I don't love about that is how slow it happened. We have Vecna coughing for like 10 minutes, it feels like. It just kept going on. I was like, are we going to do something about this guy? Like, anyone gonna step up? I don't know. Should we do something? And then everyone slowly comes in. We get like a shot of every single character who's here. The kids that we just saved are here, and the original kids are here, and everyone's coming in, and Vecna's here, and then Joyce is here, and she's got an axe. And slowly, she chops at Vecna, and we get a flashback to all the characters that we've lost. Bob, and Barb, and Eddie, and everyone that we've lost before that was a meaningful, well-loved character. It's all in their memory, and we have a mom defending these kids. But how much more impactful would that moment be if we get the jump scare, Vecna's maybe not gone yet, and Joyce just runs in and is like, no, not again, I'm done. And just quickly, this one moment that is a reaction, that is a gut reaction as a mom to protecting these kids. Now that would have been an emotional moment. It would have been reactive. And yet everything here feels so slow. And the reality is, the most interesting thing, in my opinion, about acting, about watching actors, about watching a story and how it unfolds, is the reaction. So when you build up these moments to the point that I expect what's coming next, it takes away from the momentum of the story. It takes away from the impact of the moment, because it's really about looking to see what'll happen, not waiting for the thing that you now know is going to happen because of how the moment plays into it to finally eventually happen. I heard that Stranger Things got a note, that this production crew got a note about how they had to make sure these moments were clear, that they needed more exposition, they needed more explanations, because if they didn't have them, people viewing wouldn't be able to catch up, because there's a lot of people now that watch things while they're doing something else. They're not fully focused on the film, on the television show that they're watching at the time. And I feel like a lot of the things that we're seeing in this final season probably are a result of that note, but there is also a lot of stuff here that just feels like it's trying to build up a moment for the sake of it, because it is being self-indulgent, and it's really everyone feeling like this is a big moment, so we want to make sure that we give it its time. And I understand that, but you have to know when to cut, because good Lord, 2 hours and 8 minutes is a long finale, you know? And I don't think we needed all of it. The other issue I have with this finale is sometimes there are these impossible moments. For example, in the final fight, there's a moment where some of our cast need to get up onto these cliffs. Some of our characters are getting up there they're kind of like luring the Mind Flayer and Vecna into this spot, and they're like, we'll go up above. How did they get to those cliffs? I still don't know. They were like, we're going to do that right now. And I'm like, right now? That looks pretty far. Also, I gotta say, speaking of things and how they looked, I really wish this had been approached as more of an 80s film or 80s television show where things had been more practical, because once we're in the upside down and beyond the upside down into this other plane, good Lord, it does not look good. It looks pretty rough. It's like all of the budget disappeared from the show and now everything's just on a green screen. And we also don't even have sets at times on that green screen. So there's nothing around. It's just a bunch of people and a green screen. You couldn't even give them some rocks? Come on. So I wish that they had found a way to make the Mind Flayer a little bit more realistic in terms of just making it practical in some way. Like, it doesn't have to be the whole thing. And I do think the CG on the Mind Flayer did look good, but it's more like you can tell that things are computer generated, you know? You can tell that that is what we're doing. And because of that, it doesn't ground you as much in the story. And I just feel that sometimes, I'm sure this is where they spent all of their budget, but sometimes when we spend all of our budget on making things digitally, it actually looks worse than if you had just spent less and done it practically, and then everyone gets to also see the thing. It grounds your performers more. Also, speaking of performers, I just need to acknowledge the fact that Finn Wolfhard is, I don't think, a very good actor. And this season finale, he got more to do, and it really made me realize, like, yikes. And this is one of our main characters. I think the best moments with Finn in the show, in the season finale, are when he's at the table and he's doing the campaign. I thought that was pretty good. And the moment where he puts his book back on the shelf. I actually felt that that was a really good moment for Wolfhard in the show as Mike. But for the most part, like, his scene with Eleven, where they are in her mind and they're having this goodbye, my goodness. Yikes. Ultimately, I think the problem with Stranger Things is just that we're getting this final season a couple years too late. If we had gotten this season 2 years ago, I think it would have been a lot more hype. But we've now built up all this time for this end to a series that just, its time kind of already ended. The whole trend of the 80s being fashionable is already kind of on its way out. Everyone's really into the millennium now, not the 80s. And that's just kind of where we're at. So I think that that is unfortunately going to overshadow all of the hard work that people put into this, and for a lot of people, ruin the end of the show. For me, I do think it was overall still a good and satisfying ending, even though it came a little bit late, I think. But we've been telling this story for some time, and I found the way that they decided to finish the story, the moments characters got near the end, and the payoff of finding out where everyone's going after, the kind of denouement of the story, was well done. It was not my favorite season. I think my favorite season is still season 3. However, it was a season, and it wasn't bad. I think it was still good, but I think it could have been better if we had just cut more aggressively. Overall, that's what I have for my thoughts on Stranger Things season 5 and the finale. There are a lot of elements of it that I enjoyed and had a lot of fun with, but I just feel like there's a lot missing here for it to be like peak television. It was just good. It wasn't, I wanted it to be amazing, and there are some really excellent moments in it, but there's not enough in between to elevate the entire season for me. However, I do kind of want to go back and watch some of the earlier seasons and see how those hold up now, so maybe I'll do that. And if I do that, and that is something you'd be interested in, please let me know down in the comments below. Definitely let me know what you thought of the final season of Stranger Things down in the comments, and how you felt about, some of this pacing and the way that the story was also even cut up and presented to us. How do you feel about it? Let me know down in the comments. I'll see you down there to discuss. And until next time, friends, as always, stay nerdy. Bye! And if you like when I talk about Stranger Things and you missed any of my other reviews, you can check that out over here.